When my daughter-in-law told me to leave, I smiled instead of crying. It wasn't because I was strong, it was because I was empty. I had spent years pouring every ounce of love I had into a home that no longer had space for me. People often imagine heartbreak as something loud, shouting, slammed doors, tears on the floor. But sometimes heartbreak is quiet. It happens in silence, in the sound of your own footsteps leaving the porch you built with your own hands. That was me that morning. I still remember the way the air smelled, that mix of rain and garden soil, the soft hum of the refrigerator behind me, and the faint ticking of the old kitchen clock that had survived more moves than I could count. It was a beautiful home once. A home filled with laughter, late-night board games, and my son's deep voice echoing from the hallway whenever he'd come back from college. I used to believe nothing could break the bond between a mother and her son. Not time, not distance, not even marriage. But life has a way of teaching us that love doesn't disappear. It just changes shape, and sometimes it changes direction. My son Daniel was everything to me. His father passed away when he was just 14. I remember the day I told him. He didn't cry right away. He just stared at me like he was trying to understand why I looked so small all of a sudden. From that moment, something shifted in him. He tried to be the man of the house far too early. He'd fix leaky faucets, mow the lawn before school, and make me tea whenever I looked tired. I used to tell him, "You don't have to take care of me, sweetheart. You're just a boy." And he'd smile and say, "Maybe, but you're my mom." Those words stayed with me for decades. They were the invisible thread that held my heart together through all the long nights and lonely winters. When Daniel grew older, he became everything a mother could dream of: gentle, hard-working, humble. He studied engineering, then moved to the city for a job. I'd call him every evening, just to hear the sound of his voice. He'd tell me about his co-workers, his tiny apartment, the traffic that drove him crazy. I'd listen, smiling into the receiver, pretending I didn't notice how much I missed him. And then one day, he mentioned her. Her name was Claire. The way he said her name was different, soft, careful, like he was holding something delicate in his mouth. I knew instantly she meant something special. He told me she worked in the same office, that she laughed too loud, drank too much coffee, and had a way of making boring meetings feel like adventures. I remember smiling as he talked about her. There was pride in my heart, pride that he had found someone who made him happy. But there was also a tiny pinch of fear, the kind that only mothers understand, the quiet worry that one day the person your child loves will love them so completely, there won't be any room left for you. When Daniel brought Claire home for the first time, I could tell she was nervous. She wore a cream sweater and simple jeans, her hair pulled back in a neat bun. She smiled politely, complimented the house, and brought a pie she'd baked herself. We talked over dinner. She told me about her family, her love for painting, and how Daniel made her laugh when she least expected it. I liked her, truly. She had a spark, a kindness that filled the room. But I also noticed how Daniel looked at her every time she spoke. The world could have been burning down outside, and he wouldn't have noticed. For the first time in my life, I realized my son's heart was no longer mine alone. Still, I welcomed her with open arms. I told myself, this is how life works. Children grow, they love, they start their own stories. I wanted to be part of theirs, not as a shadow, but as a light quietly glowing in the background. When they got married a year later, I stood beside them, proud but trembling inside. Claire looked radiant in her white dress, and Daniel's eyes shone like I hadn't seen since he was a child. After the ceremony, he hugged me and whispered, "You'll always be my first home, Mum." I believed him, and for a while it was true. They moved into a small house on the outskirts of town, close enough for weekend visits, far enough for them to have their privacy. I would bake cookies and bring them over every Sunday. Claire would open the door with a smile that sometimes felt a little forced, but I brushed it off. Newlyweds need space. I told myself to be patient. At first, everything seemed fine. She'd make tea, we'd sit in the living room and chat about her new job, or the neighbour's noisy dog. But over time, small things began to shift. The teapot wouldn't be set out anymore. My visits became shorter. Daniel started texting instead of calling. It wasn't sudden. It was like watching the tide pull away from the shore, one gentle wave at a time. I noticed how Claire would glance at the clock when I talked, or how Daniel would subtly change the topic whenever I mentioned visiting again. One Sunday, she told me they were redecorating and needed some space for the week. That week turned into 2, then 3. I started finding reasons to call. Just checking if you're eating well. The weather's bad. Drive carefully. But every call seemed to interrupt something. There was always background noise, laughter, or Claire's voice faintly saying, "Tell her we'll call later." And slowly those invisible threads, the ones that tied us together, began to fray. I didn't blame her. I didn't even blame him. I blamed time. Time that turns children into strangers, homes into houses, and love into polite distance. Yet deep down, I believed it was just a phase. I believed Daniel would always find his way back, because mothers and sons have a way of circling home, no matter how far they wander. But I was wrong. It took one moment, one quiet morning to realize how much had changed. And that morning would become the day my daughter-in-law turned my son against me. It began with little things, the kind of small changes that only a mother notices, the kind that don't shout, they whisper. Daniel's voice on the phone grew shorter, quieter. His laughter didn't come as easily. And when it did, it no longer sounded like the laughter I knew. It was lighter, more polite, like a man performing happiness rather than living it. I remember one Saturday morning when I called him just to ask if they'd like to come over for lunch. He paused before answering. "Claire's parents are visiting this weekend, Mum," he said softly. "We'll come by soon, I promise." He meant well. I could tell. But something in his tone made me put the phone down and sit in silence for a while. I looked around the house Daniel grew up in. His childhood photo still lined the hallway. There he was at age 5, missing a front tooth. At 12, wearing that too big baseball uniform. At 18, standing proudly in his graduation cap. Each photo felt like a piece of my heart framed on the wall, frozen in time. But none of them could tell me when I'd lost him. The next few months passed quietly, too quietly. I started baking less, cleaning less. The house stayed spotless because there was no one to make a mess anymore. The kettle hardly whistled. The TV played old shows just to fill the silence. Then, one afternoon, Daniel called. "Mum," he said, "Claire and I were thinking of inviting you over for dinner this weekend." My heart leapt. "Oh, that sounds lovely," I said. I remember the relief in my voice, the way hope can rush in after months of stillness. I spent the next few days preparing a small basket of gifts, a scented candle for Claire, a jar of homemade jam for Daniel. I even baked his favourite apple pie. When I arrived, the house looked beautiful, freshly painted walls, new furniture, flowers on the windowsill. Claire opened the door and smiled, but her eyes didn't. "Oh, you didn't have to bring anything," she said politely, taking the basket. "I wanted to," I replied. "It's been too long." We sat in the living room, and for a while it felt normal. Claire poured tea, Daniel asked about the garden, and we talked about the weather and the neighbours. But as the minutes passed, I could feel something heavy in the air. Claire spoke in measured tones, polite but distant. She didn't meet my eyes often. And Daniel, he seemed caught between us, as if every word he said needed approval from both sides. After dinner, Claire cleared the plates and said she needed to prepare for work the next morning. She excused herself, leaving Daniel and me in the living room. I smiled at him, trying to break the awkwardness. "She's lovely, Daniel. You're lucky." He smiled faintly. "Yeah, she's amazing." But then he sighed. "Mum, can I ask you something?" "Of course." He hesitated. "When you come over, could you maybe call first? Claire she likes to plan things ahead. It stresses her when people drop by suddenly." It was a small request, reasonable even. But something in the way he said it, the careful tone, the quiet apology, made my chest tighten. I nodded. Of course, dear, I didn't mean to intrude. You're not intruding, he said quickly. You know I love having you here. But the reassurance sounded like something he'd practiced. That night, as I drove home, I kept replaying the moment in my mind. The way he said cool first, the way she had looked at me across the table, polite, guarded, almost territorial. I started calling less, visiting less. I told myself it was for their comfort, but deep down I was afraid of becoming unwanted. Months rolled by. Holidays came and went. For Thanksgiving I cooked a full meal, turkey, mashed potatoes, pie, just in case they decided to come. They didn't. Daniel sent a text late that night. We're having dinner with Claire's family this year, Mum. Love you. I sat at the table alone, the candles flickering beside untouched dishes. I thought about how strange it was, how love can fill a house completely one year and leave it echoing the next. The hardest part wasn't the silence. It was pretending it didn't hurt. Sometimes I'd drive past their house just to see the lights on, imagining them inside, laughing, talking, living a life that no longer included me. And every time, I told myself I was being silly, that this was just what happens when children grow up. But something inside me whispered otherwise. It wasn't just time taking him away. It was her. Slowly, softly, deliberately. Then came the Christmas I'll never forget. I had mailed them gifts early, a new sweater for Daniel, a cookbook for Claire. I waited all day for a call or even a message. None came. Late that night, I finally called him. He answered on the third ring. Oh, hey, Mum. Sorry, today's been crazy. I smiled, trying to keep my voice steady. Did you get my package? Yes, thank you. Claire loved the book. That makes me happy, I said. I just wanted to wish you both Merry Christmas. There was a pause. Then I heard Claire's voice in the background. It was faint, but I caught the words. Tell her we're heading out soon. Daniel's voice grew softer. Mum, we're just on our way to her parents. I'll call you tomorrow, okay? Of course, dear. Have fun. He hung up. I sat there, the lights from the tree blinking softly against the dark window. The house smelled of cinnamon and pine, but it felt hollow. I watched the clock tick past midnight. Tomorrow came, but the call never did. By spring, the distance between us had a name. It wasn't misunderstanding. It wasn't time. It was Claire. She didn't say cruel words or raise her voice. No, she used silence and subtlety and small shifts in tone. I could see it every time Daniel looked to her before speaking, every time my name came up and she smiled that thin, closed-lipped smile. I began to fade from their world quietly. Birthdays turned into text messages. Visits turned into polite excuses. And eventually, even the excuses stopped coming. Once, I dropped by unannounced. Just once. I told myself it was because I was in the neighborhood. I had baked a loaf of banana bread and wanted to share it while it was still warm. When I rang the bell, it took a long time for someone to open. Claire appeared at the door, surprised. Her smile was quick, practiced. Oh, hi, Daniel's at work. That's all right, I said gently. I just wanted to drop this off. She hesitated before taking it. You really shouldn't have. We're trying to cut down on sweets. The words weren't harsh, but the message was clear. I stood there a moment longer, searching her eyes for warmth. There was none. Well, tell him I stopped by, I said quietly. Sure, she replied, already closing the door. As I walked back to my car, I felt something inside me sink, not shatter, just sink, like a small boat finally giving up against the tide. That evening, Daniel called. Mum, Claire said you came by. Yes, I said softly. I brought some bread. He hesitated. You know, It might be better to let us know next time. She just likes things in order. I smiled through the ache. I understand. But what I really understood was this. I was no longer welcome in my son's life unless invited. After that, I stopped visiting altogether. I told myself it was to give them space, but in truth, I was protecting what little dignity I had left. Every night I sat by the window with my cup of tea, staring out into the dark, whispering his name under my breath like a prayer. Daniel. Sometimes I wondered if he could still feel it, that invisible tug between us, the quiet pulse of a mother's love that never stops beating, even when forgotten. But the heart can only whisper for so long before silence answers back. And that silence was growing louder every day. To be continued. The breaking point did not arrive with shouting. It came in the form of an envelope. One quiet Friday morning, I found it wedged between the bills and the grocery flyer. The handwriting was Daniel's. Careful, a little slanted. The same way he used to write thank you notes to his teachers when he was a boy. I smiled when I saw it, thinking perhaps he had written me a letter. People don't write letters anymore. The thought filled me with warmth. But when I opened it, the warmth slipped away. Inside was a short note and a check. The note read, Mom, Claire and I want to help with the house expenses and repairs. We know it's old and needs work. Please use this for anything you might need. Love, Daniel. It was kind, thoughtful on the surface. But there was something else beneath it. Something that said, we feel sorry for you now. I stared at that check for a long time. It wasn't the money. It was what it represented. A quiet shift from family to obligation. My son, who once begged me to let him pay for gas when he was 18 because he wanted to take care of me, was now sending me money because he didn't know how else to reach me. I folded the check carefully and put it away. I couldn't cash it. It would feel like accepting charity from my own child. That evening, I called him. Daniel, I said softly, thank you for the note. But you don't need to send me money, sweetheart. I'm fine. He hesitated. Mum, please don't take it the wrong way. Claire just thought... I smiled, even though he couldn't see it. I know she means well, I said, but I don't need help. I just need time with you. He was quiet for a long moment before replying. Things are just, busy right now. That word, busy, is the slow poison of modern love. It excuses every absence, masks every avoidance. It's polite, reasonable, and cold. After that call, I didn't hear from him for nearly 2 months. Spring turned into summer. The garden bloomed wild and untended. The lavender bushes spread over the walkway, and the old oak tree by the fence shed bark in the heat. I used to think of that house as my anchor. Now it felt like an island slowly sinking into quiet water. Then one afternoon, a neighbour stopped by. I saw Daniel and Claire at the farmer's market last weekend, she said cheerfully. You must be so proud of them. I smiled, though something tightened in my chest. Yes, very proud. I asked what they looked like. She described how happy they seemed, laughing together, holding hands, bags of fresh produce swinging at their sides. I nodded and thanked her. When she left, I sat on the porch steps and cried silently, the kind of tears that never really fall. They just blur the world until it doesn't look like yours anymore. It wasn't jealousy. It was grief. The quiet grief of realizing you've been replaced by someone else's laughter. The final fracture came a few weeks later. It was Daniel's birthday. Every year since he turned 1, I had baked him a chocolate cake. Even when he was in college, I'd mail one in a box lined with dry ice. It was our tradition. Small, silly, but ours. That morning, I baked again. The smell of chocolate filled the kitchen. I decorated it with his favourite frosting, simple white swirls and a few blue candles. I wrapped a book I knew he'd love and drove to their house, heart trembling but hopeful. When I pulled into the driveway, Claire's car was there. The blinds were drawn, but I could see light flickering inside. I rang the doorbell, clutching the cake box. It took a while, but eventually Claire opened the door. She looked surprised, her hand still on the knob. "Oh," she said. "I didn't know you were coming." I smiled nervously. "It's Daniel's birthday. I thought I'd bring his favourite cake." Her lips tightened in something that was almost a smile. "We were just about to head out. He's getting ready." "That's all right," I said. "I'll just give it to him." She hesitated. "He's in the shower right now. I'll let him know you stopped by." I looked past her shoulder, hoping to glimpse him, to hear his voice. But she didn't move aside. The door stayed half closed between us. "Please tell him happy birthday from me," I said quietly, placing the cake in her hands. She nodded. "Of course." And then she shut the door. I stood there for a moment, staring at the wood grain. I could hear faint music from inside, soft laughter, the clinking of glasses, my son's voice, low but unmistakable. My fingers trembled around the empty air where the cake had been. Something inside me cracked. Not dramatically, no scream, no collapse. Just a deep, hollow sound somewhere in the soul, like a rope finally snapping after years of strain. I walked back to my car and sat in silence. The street was peaceful, birds singing, a child's bicycle left on a lawn. The world carried on as if nothing had happened. But inside that parked car, I felt a kind of ending. That night, Daniel called. "Mom," he began, his tone strained. "Claire said you came by today." "Yes," I said. My voice sounded small, even to me. "I brought you a cake." There was a pause. "You really didn't have to do that." "I wanted to," I replied. He sighed. "Mum, look, Claire feels uncomfortable when you just drop in. It makes her anxious. I think it's best if you call ahead, or maybe we plan visits instead." I closed my eyes. "I see. It's nothing personal," he continued quickly. "We just need boundaries." That word again. Boundaries. The polite wall people build when they want to push you out without sounding cruel. I swallowed hard. "Of course, Daniel. You're right." He softened. "You know I love you, Mum." "I know," I whispered. But I wasn't sure anymore what that meant. After we hung up, I sat in the dark for a long time. I could still smell the chocolate cake in the air. I imagined it sitting untouched on their counter, or worse, thrown away. That was the night I stopped calling. Weeks turned into months. The loneliness didn't just sit beside me anymore. It lived with me. It woke up when I did, followed me through every quiet room and lay down with me at night. I tried to distract myself, joined a reading group, volunteered at the library, but every time I saw a young man smile at his mother, something inside me ached. Then, one morning the phone rang. It was Daniel. "Mum," he said, "can we talk?" "Of course," I said, my heart fluttering with cautious hope. He arrived that afternoon. When I opened the door, I barely recognized him. He looked older, more tired, still my boy, but with shadows under his eyes. Claire didn't come. We sat in the living room, the same one where he'd once built Lego towers and studied for exams. The silence between us felt enormous. He took a breath. "Mum, I think we need to clear the air." I nodded slowly. "All right." He hesitated. "Claire feels like you don't respect her space. She says you make her feel judged, like she's never good enough." I felt the words like tiny stones thrown at my chest. Judged? I've never said anything unkind to her. "I know," he said quickly, "but sometimes it's not what you say. It's how you make her feel." I looked down at my hands. They were trembling. "I'm sorry if I've made her uncomfortable. I only ever wanted to be part of your lives." "I know you did," he said softly. "But we just need some distance. For a while." Distance? I repeated. Just until things settle down, he said. Claire's been stressed and I need to support her. There it was, the quiet betrayal, wrapped in gentle words. Not shouted, not cruel. Just delivered softly, like a doctor explaining an incurable illness. I smiled faintly, because that's what mothers do when their hearts are breaking. They make it easier for their children. I understand, I said. He reached over and squeezed my hand. Thank you for understanding, Mum. You're the best. And then he left. When the door closed behind him, I felt the house exhale. The silence that followed was not peaceful. It was final. That was the day my son truly turned away, not with anger but with obedience, to a life where I no longer fit. That night, I went to the porch. The sky was filled with stars, scattered like memories I could almost touch but never hold again. I thought of Daniel's first steps, his laughter echoing in the kitchen, the smell of pancakes on Sunday mornings. I whispered into the night. I did my best. The wind didn't answer. It only rustled the trees, carrying the sound away. And for the first time I realized love can still break your heart, even when no one means to hurt you. The weeks that followed were the longest of my life. The days stretched like years, each one filled with silence that seemed to hum through the walls. I'd wake early, still half expecting to hear Daniel's voice calling from the kitchen like he used to when he visited. Morning, Mum. Do we have any coffee left? But the only sound was the soft groan of the house settling in its quiet. At first I kept busy. It's what people do when their hearts are breaking. I cleaned every corner of the house, polished the old wooden table until it gleamed, repainted the porch railing. But no matter how spotless the rooms became, the air still felt heavy with something missing. Everywhere I turned there were reminders of him. His baseball glove still hung by the back door. His old college sweater was folded neatly in the linen closet. Sometimes I'd find myself standing in his room for no reason at all, just breathing in the faint scent of the past, the smell of old books, laundry soap, and something warm that only belonged to him. I tried to tell myself he was just busy, that he'd call when things calmed down. But weeks turned into months, and the phone stayed silent. I stopped leaving the ringer on. After a while, even hope began to feel heavy. There's a strange kind of loneliness that comes when you lose someone who's still alive. It's not like grief after death, where people offer condolences and flowers. This kind of grief hides in plain sight. You still set 2 plates out of habit. You still check your messages, still whisper their name when you see something they'd love. But the world doesn't see it. The world calls it distance. One afternoon, I decided to take a walk down to the lake. Daniel and I used to go there every summer when he was little. We'd feed the ducks, skip stones across the water, and watch the sun go down behind the trees. The path was the same, narrow, lined with birch trees and dandelions, but it felt smaller now, as if time had folded it inward. I sat on the old bench near the water's edge. The wood was cracked, and initials carved into it had faded with rain and years. For a long time, I just listened, to the soft splash of the waves, the rustle of wind in the reeds. I thought about the years that had passed, about how quickly love can turn into distance when words are left unsaid. And I realized something I hadn't before. I had spent so much time wanting Daniel to come back to me that I never stopped to think about what he might have been running toward. Maybe he wasn't turning away from me because of hate or resentment. Maybe he was just trying to protect the peace in his own home. Maybe Claire wasn't the villain I had painted in my mind. Maybe she was just another woman trying to build a life she could feel safe in. The thought didn't erase the pain, but it softened it, like warm water over ice. That night I sat down at my kitchen table and began to write a letter. My hands trembled as I held the pen, but the words came gently, like rain after a long drought. Dear Daniel, I hope you and Claire are doing well. I miss you both more than I can say, but please don't mistake that for blame. I'm sorry if I've ever made you feel torn between us. I never wanted to be a weight you carried. If giving you space means giving you peace, then I will do it willingly. Just know that this house and my heart will always be open to you, no matter how much time passes. Love always, Mum. I folded the letter carefully and mailed it the next morning. I didn't expect a reply. In truth, writing it was more for me than for him. It was my way of releasing the ache I'd been holding for too long. Days passed, then weeks. The letter disappeared into the rhythm of mail trucks and sorting centres, and life went on quietly. I started spending more time at the library, joined a knitting group, began volunteering at the senior centre on Tuesdays. It felt good to be needed again, even in small ways. Still, every now and then I'd look out the window when the mailman came, hoping to see Daniel's handwriting. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the house filled with that soft golden light that makes everything look forgiving, the phone rang. "Hello? Mum?" My heart stopped for a moment. It was Daniel. His voice was quiet, uncertain, like a boy asking permission to come home. "Daniel," I said softly. "Is everything all right?" "I got your letter," he said. There was a pause. I could hear him take a breath. "I'm sorry, Mom." I closed my eyes. For a second, I couldn't speak. "You don't have to apologize, sweetheart," I said finally. "No, I do," he insisted. "I let things go too far. I thought I was protecting Claire, but I was hurting you. She told me about the day you brought the cake. She said you looked so hopeful. I should have opened the door myself." Tears filled my eyes before I could stop them. "You were just doing what you thought was right. I understand." He hesitated. "Mum, would it be all right if we came by this weekend? Claire wants to come too." I smiled through the tears. "Of course, Daniel. You don't need to ask." After we hung up, I sat there for a long time, just breathing. The house felt alive again, as if it had been waiting for that call as much as I had. That weekend, I woke early and cleaned the house from top to bottom. I didn't do it out of nervousness, I did it out of joy. I baked bread, arranged flowers on the table, and even set out the old teapot Daniel had given me for Mother's Day years ago. The one with the tiny chip near the handle. When I heard the car pull into the driveway, my heart fluttered. I opened the door before they could knock. Daniel stood there, smiling shyly, holding a bouquet of daisies. Claire was beside him, her hands clasped in front of her. She looked different, tired maybe, but softer. "Hi, Mum," Daniel said. "Hi, sweetheart," I whispered. Claire stepped forward. "I brought you something." She held out a small box wrapped in paper. Inside was a silver picture frame with a photo of the three of us at their wedding. She'd written in neat handwriting at the bottom, "Family, no matter what." For a moment, none of us spoke. Then she said quietly, "I'm sorry if I ever made you feel unwelcome. I was just trying so hard to do everything right, I didn't realize I was pushing you away." I reached out and touched her hand. "You were protecting your home. I understand." We sat together for hours that day. We talked about everything and nothing, the garden, her new job, the funny habits Daniel still hadn't grown out of. Laughter returned to the house like sunlight after rain. When they left, Claire hugged me first. It was brief, but real. "Thank you," she whispered. Daniel lingered at the door. "I love you, Mom." "I know," I said softly. I never stopped believing that. When they drove away, I stood on the porch watching their car disappear down the road. The ache in my chest was still there, but it was no longer sharp. It had become something gentler, a reminder, not a wound. That night, I made myself a cup of tea and sat by the window. The world outside was quiet, bathed in silver moonlight. For the first time in years, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt peaceful. I realized then that forgiveness doesn't always come as a single grand moment. Sometimes it arrives quietly, in the simple act of opening your door again. And love, real love, doesn't vanish when people drift apart. It waits, patiently, like light behind clouds, ready to shine the moment you let it. The next morning after Daniel and Claire's visit, I woke before sunrise. The sky was pale blue, the kind that carries both the promise of a new day and the memory of the night before. I sat by the window, wrapped in my old shawl, a cup of tea warming my hands, and just listened. The house was still, but it no longer felt lonely. For the first time in a long time, silence sounded like peace. I thought about everything that had happened, the years of distance, the quiet misunderstandings, the tears I never let fall. And then I thought about that moment at the door, when Daniel smiled again like he used to, and Claire's eyes softened with understanding. It wasn't a perfect ending, but maybe life never gives us those. Maybe it gives us small chances to make things right, and it's up to us to take them. There's a part of motherhood no one talks about. They tell you how to raise your children, how to protect them, how to love them fiercely, but they don't tell you how to let them go. They don't tell you how to love them quietly from a distance, or how to forgive them when they forget you, not out of cruelty, but out of simply trying to live their own lives. I used to think that being a mother meant always being needed, but I've learned that real love isn't about being needed. It's about being remembered kindly. It's about knowing that even if you're not part of their every day, your voice still lives somewhere in their heart. The day Daniel asked for distance, I thought I'd lost him forever. I thought that was the end of our story. But life has a way of circling back. Not because time heals everything, it doesn't, but because love, when it's true, never disappears. It just waits patiently in the quiet corners until hearts are ready again. In the weeks that followed their visit, things began to feel normal, new, but normal. Daniel called more often. Sometimes they'd stop by on Sundays, bringing groceries or stories about their week. Claire would show me photos from her garden, and I'd share recipes I'd learned decades ago. It wasn't the same as before, but it was something real. It was family. And I noticed something else too. Daniel looked happier. Not just in the comfortable way of someone who's moved on, but in the peaceful way of someone who's made peace with where he came from. I realized then that maybe that was what all of this had been about. He wasn't turning away from me. He was finding himself. And I had to let him. One evening, as we sat together in the living room, Daniel glanced at the photo wall. Most of the pictures were of him, his school plays, his graduation, his wedding. He smiled. "You kept them all." "Of course," I said. "Every one of them is a story." He was quiet for a moment, then said, "You know, Claire and I are thinking of starting a family soon." The words settled in the air like sunlight. My heart swelled with something beyond happiness, something like gratitude. "Oh, Daniel," I said softly, "you're going to be a wonderful father." He reached for my hand. I learned from the best. I looked at him, and in that moment, the years of hurt, the distance, the doubt, they all fell away. What was left was love. Plain, quiet, forgiving love. That night, after they left, I sat by the window again. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, whispering softly. The stars looked close enough to touch. I thought about all the mothers in the world sitting by their own windows, wondering if their children still think of them. To those mothers, I would say this: don't lose heart. Even when they drift away, even when their voices grow faint, your love is still the light they'll find their way back to. Sometimes, love doesn't shout across distance. It hums quietly, waiting for the right moment to be heard again. I've learned that forgiveness isn't something you give because someone deserves it. It's something you give because you need peace. And peace doesn't come from forgetting the pain. It comes from understanding it. Now, every time Daniel calls or Claire sends me a photo of the flowers in their garden, I whisper a quiet thank you to time, to patience, to the small mercies that stitch broken things back together. And when I look at that photo frame she gave me, the one that says family, no matter what, I smile. Because after everything, it's true. Family isn't perfect. It's not always kind. But it's real. And sometimes, that's enough. So, when I think back to the day my daughter-in-law turned my son against me, I don't think of it as the day I lost him anymore. I think of it as the day I began to understand what love really means. It means letting go and still waiting with the door open. It means hurting but choosing hope anyway. It means forgiving again and again. Because love, real love, always finds its way home. And it did.